So the first pitfall that we wanted to talk about is how PDs are going to be working with core members once they've completed their online courses, but who still may be lacking skills that were developed in the online courses. And so in pitfall number 1, we see a PD who has a core member who hasn't fully mastered how to write strong objectives, and is sort of is at a crossroads. They could either remediate the skill on their own, or they could recognize that this is a skill that's addressed in an online course, take advantage of the fact that there's an existing demo that they could use to build knowledge and skill in the core member, and direct the core member to that. I think this is a really critical point for PDs because with that decision, they're making a time commitment that's significantly different. They're also going to be at a point where they're learning how and whether to use resources to move their core members forward beyond just themselves. I think that this came up last year sort of across the board as PDs were figuring out how to use both online learning and in-person support. Bonnie Benson and I were talking about this earlier today. Bonnie, could you tell us a little bit about how you saw this play out in Houston, both in round 0 and later in the year?
Yeah, so over the course of last summer, we had our program directors go through the online courses, and so during the round 0 kickoff, they could stand up in front of their programs and say, yes, we went through these online courses and we think that they are absolutely wonderful. But what had happened was, I don't think our PDs really truly internalized the courses in terms of knowing which modules to go back to when a core member was struggling with X or Y or Z. And so when core members were struggling with certain skills, program directors would then go build that skill or just generally say, oh, well, that was in this course, just go back to that course, and not able to pinpoint exactly where in that course they should go back to. And so over time, I think that the courses to our core members just seemed like this thing that they did over the summer, and then at the end of round 0, when they were reflecting on their experience, they just kind of didn't really understand how those courses fit into the bigger picture. And so all we saw in our round 0 survey was like, those online courses were awful. We had to sit in a room for so long and do these courses, and then we never used them again. And so I think that throughout the year, those tools, I mean, what we saw is our core members and program directors always going back to those same skills, those unit planning skills, those backwards planning skills, those lesson planning skills, that if they had a strong sense in where those online courses to go back and remediate those, they could have done that. However, program directors were always rebuilding those skills throughout the rest of the year.
Great, thank you, Bonnie. And I feel like you're pulling out a couple of things here. One is that, we want our program directors to be thinking about these courses as ongoing resources, and this could make a big impact just throughout the year. I think you're also pulling out a really critical distinction, which is the difference between being familiar with the online courses and what's generally taught in them, and really understanding what knowledge and skills are built in each course and how you could use them. I think the second distinction that I think you also might be getting at is just, we aren't necessarily talking about wanting PDs to memorize everything that's in their online courses, but I think that with the one-pagers that you looked at yesterday that tell you exactly what's in the course, those are the things that PDs could use to efficiently figure out what their core members should know, and also figure out where to redirect them if they recognize that a skill is missing. And when I think about what it would take for a PD to use those tools seamlessly, I think they would need to have an integrated focus within their regional team where people are using those one-pagers, talking about skills that are built in the courses, and modeling how you would redirect core members to the courses to remediate. So I think if that is a trend that you saw in your region, that might be something to prioritize to pull out for your plans. Samantha, do you want to walk us through the next pitfall?
Sure. So when I look at this next pitfall, the way I should be thinking about supporting other needs beyond round 0 deliverables, I'm thinking about a bunch of different things. There's a lot happening during round 0, as we've been saying again and again. And I think there are a number of different things that I want to make sure that I have on the top of my mind as a program director. And so one thing that I'm thinking about is just there's a plethora of resources out there. And so when I'm thinking about what I want to set my core members up with management, or what I want to set my core members up to be able to create systems in their classroom, there are a host of resources outside of the deliverables that I should be thinking about pointing out to my core members. And when I think about what happened in our region last year, I think that like everything that we needed to do, we created. And part of that was the resource exchange didn't exist. Part of that was we didn't have the knowledge around the resources that were out there. And I think we're at a point in time at Teach for America, and especially within our teams, that there are so many other resources out there that we need to be helping to tap into for our core members. And so that's one piece that I think about when I'm reading this pitfall. There's also another piece that I think about when I'm looking at this pitfall, and that is the conversations we were having yesterday, and the point that Rebecca was bringing up around just holistically thinking about core members beyond the effectiveness world. And so I think, again, a pitfall that we faced in our region in Atlanta last year was thinking about Round Zero it was all about effectiveness and relationship building, and it wasn't ever explicitly about retention. It was all about wanting to make sure core members got to the point of having data, but it wasn't about wanting to make sure core members were confident and comfortable and were going to be returning to their classroom every day and every week. And so when I think about this pitfall, I just think that it forces us to think about the larger scope and span of what's happening within the round.
I think that's so important. I think that how much our PDs are thinking about other needs in addition to Round Zero could mean a lot for our core members' long-term effectiveness. And one thing that I think has been really striking has been what it takes for core members to visit TFANet and the resource exchange and other parts of the ILE resources that we've built up a lot this year. And I think that we sort of consistently see that whether or not our core members visit those sites really comes back to whether the PD is communicating about them and doing small informal things like sending a link to a resource, mentioning TFANet, opening up TFANet on their computer when they're meeting with core members. We're talking about high time-intensive actions, but I think the extent to which PDs are using these tools with their core members is going to affect how much our core members use them themselves. And so when you're thinking about this pitfall, I think it would be great to consider, the extent to which you saw PDs in your region taking advantage of the ILE resources, and what resources do you think are going to be most helpful and useful for core members during Round Zero. I just wanted to show you a quick screenshot of a couple resources that I think PDs should really know about. What you're looking at right now is one of 4 pages of classroom mini visits that probably would be really useful to, say, an elementary core member who needs to learn how to do morning meetings. That might be something that a PD wouldn't be able to teach themselves or have time to teach themselves, but if they knew that this was on the resource exchange, this is something that they could then send to their core member. And I think that one reason why, from the PDs that I've talked to, PDs might not spend a lot of time doing things like this is that they simply may not be familiar enough themselves with what resources are there on TFANet. So if you think that might be an issue in your region, one reason why I think that happened this year is that we heard a sort of common misconception that it could take 6 hours to get familiar with what's on TFANet, and a PD might sort of put that off or deprioritize it because they had this idea that it would take a really long time to get to know what's available. So I think that it would be really good to think about what would 10 minutes a week do to get your PDs familiar with what they need to know here, so they can spark ideas about how they can support their core members in more informal ways. Yeah.
Can I ask a question just about that? I mean, I guess I'm hearing some of these things, and I feel like a lot of the solutions are rooted on, well, PDs aren't using SAT resources or the online courses or TFANet, largely because they might not themselves truly have internalized enough of it where they can rattle it off in a meaningful way. And I guess, and that makes total sense to me, and I guess I'm just a little worried at one point there is like a zero-sum game in terms of a PD's capacity. And like the question just resonates with me personally right now, so I'm trying to wrap my head around like all of these phenomenal tools, but like at a certain point, I am kind of curious how much time it really takes to get this stuff in a